film is really about thinking your way through around all kinds of obstacles and problems.
Work the problem.
I do love that it celebrates intelligence and that spirit of courage that these guys really have, these astronauts who do this.
There's an inherent human instinct to explore, and so space travel is just the next thing to explore.
This novel is somehow this sort of love letter to humanity, so that every choice the characters make are choices that any human being would make faced with the dilemmas that they're faced with. But it's kind of the best version of who each of us is.
It's not science fiction. It's as near fact as it could possibly be. So the challenges are reality, not fantasy.
Commander, I can't let you go through with this.
This is a script developed inside Fox Studios. It was from a great book by Andy Weir called The Martian.
My whole life I've been into the space program, manned and unmanned space flight. And I was sitting around one day thinking, okay, how could we do a manned mission to Mars with our current technology? How do we get the astronauts there? How do we make sure they survive? How do we get them home? But then I thought, okay, well, any mission plan needs to account for failures. What if this thing breaks? What if that thing breaks? What if these two things both break? How do we make sure the crew doesn't die? And I realized that these scenarios are starting to sound like an interesting story. So I made one unfortunate protagonist and subjected him to all of them.
Drew Goddard, who wrote the script, was going to direct the movie, and I read it, and I just thought the script was such a great kind of original story, and there aren't a lot of original stories getting made nowadays into films. I hadn't read the book. I'd missed it when it kind of came out and caused this little sensation.
People recommended it to each other. It got really high ratings on Amazon, and it sold really well. And that got the attention of Random House, and then they offered me a print deal. And then around the same time, Fox came for the movie rights. And the print deal and the film rights deal were agreed to 4 days apart.
It's a pretty big deal that 20th Century Fox wants to make your, at least option your book and talk about making it into a movie. I don't think he really believed me. I mean, I thought he's like, oh, okay, great.
I'm like, sure, go for it. And yeah, I was slightly worried a little bit about how they might make a movie and what they might change and stuff. But I figured, well, we'll just see what happens.
A week later, I told him, so, about that book, well, we got maybe the most in-demand screenwriter, Drew Goddard, interested in wanting to adapt this. And he loves your book. And he basically wants to do your book with very few changes.
Any concerns I might have had about the film, violating the book in some way, pretty much went away when I was talking to Drew before he even wrote the screenplay, because it was clear he wanted to follow the book very closely, and he cared a lot about the things I cared about. Most notably, he cared a lot about the scientific accuracy.
We started the process of budgeting the movie and sort of softly prepping the film, and then Drew had an opportunity to go direct, at the time he believed, a Spider-Man movie.
And so all of a sudden we had an amazing screenplay. Matt had already said that he wanted to do it. We just needed to find, as we like to say, we wanted to find a Ridley Scott type. But of course, Ridley was busy at that time because he was going to make Prometheus 2. And then, very fortunately, his schedule changed. We got him the script on a Friday, and, by Saturday, he was in.
Then I got a call that Ridley Scott wanted to direct it, so obviously that was the end of my deliberations. He said to me the first time we met, he was like, why aren't we doing this? This is going to be fun, and I was like, sold.
I was just sent it by Fox. Good scripts don't land on your desk very often, and that's why I always develop everything. So I read The Martian, and it was kind of slam dunk. I read it in, I think, 4 hours and went, I'll do it. It's such a good script, and it's based on a very good book, but the writer very respectfully adapted the script from the book.
This movie has been the most blessed process from the very beginning. From reading the book and loving the book, the studio immediately saying yes, us getting our number one pick for the writer, getting the greatest science fiction director arguably of all time, getting the perfect actor to play the part and all these other amazing actors to play their parts. There's something, I believe, intrinsic to whether it's the voice or the idea or the spirit of Andy's novel that galvanizes people, that gets people to say yes.
This is an adaptation of the book that's very true to it. It has all of its humor, all of its strange, almost ethereal lightness of this character stuck on a planet on his own.
The ultimate survival is always fascinating, particularly when it's real. What do you do when the end of the world happens? Because if you shipwreck, the end of the world's happened.
I think that was what kind of he connected to, that story of survival, and he'd always wanted to do Robinson Crusoe, and I think this was an interesting spin on it for him.
I didn't want to focus too much on deep psychological issues or anything like that. I wanted it to be all about the problem solving. And so by doing that, that means that I need to accurately present the problems.
I think people are fascinated by science when it's showed. So I think the energy of what you're learning as you go is pretty cool.
That's where the humor came in, because if you're gonna give somebody a big, long scientific exposition, you have to put jokes in there to break it up and make them want to keep reading, and also make the information stick in their mind. So that's why I made Mark such a smartass. Well, that and I'm a smartass.
How the hell could you leave me on Mars?
The biggest challenge was, how do we capture that voice in what are essentially one-man scenes without resorting to voiceover or things that are a little bit more literary and not cinematic? How do we make those scenes of Mark by himself in a relatively small set of the Hab cinematic?
I'm going to put 50 GoPros everywhere in this hut, in the loo, in the kitchen, in the laboratory. The GoPro becomes like the black box of the habitat. The GoPro becomes a companion.
We've had a complete open door relationship with NASA, with an exchange of, they want to know what we're doing. They've been helping us that we don't design things that are not correct or not where they think it may be going for the first mission to Mars. So we've had a very free exchange of ideas.
Andy's book has a lot of fantastic interactions that go on. You know, the personal tensions, the opinions, the things that aren't science that we deal with every day really ring true. Also, Andy worked very hard to get the science right. Now, it's not perfect, it's science fiction, and that's what I dearly love about it, but I think that it gives us a fabulous opportunity to tell the public what that environment actually might be like as astronauts end up on Mars in the 2030s or 2040s.
There is probably nothing grander in the human imagination than space travel. I mean, the distances are so vast. You're seeing, landscapes that don't exist in your day-to-day reality, but at the same time, you know that they actually exist. So there's a sense of wonder that I think people feel about space travel that, can capture their spirit.
The backbone of the movie is the impossibility of his task. And you can't do this without team effort. People who are playing the other side of the coin, i.e. on Earth at NASA and JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, it's a massive team effort to actually, A, get it up there, and B, then discover you've got something, big problem, and therefore what you've got to do is come together and actually get this man back down.
When I was at JPL, they showed me what happened when they landed the Curiosity rover. That 7 minutes where you don't know what's going to happen. There's no people involved. It's just a robot. But it is the continuation of the human species. It's traveling beyond what we thought was possible.
By the end of the story, I was just very touched by the humanity of it. That really, at its essence, it's a very detailed look at an entire community rallying to utilize every last piece of energy, equipment, thought, finance that they have to save a single human life.
He represents, I think, something more than just one life. He represents, everybody's hope and that kind of pioneering instinct that human beings have to go further, to plant our flag a little further, to protect ourselves ultimately.
Part of what the book does and what we really wanted to do with the movie is honor what NASA's done and what they could do. The optimism, the hopes, the aspirational quality, the courage that NASA represents, that it galvanizes people in a way that everybody together was watching the first man on the moon. There was no sense of race or gender or even nationality. And the hope with this movie is it will remind people that if the world does sort of bond together, it can do greater things than when it's divided.